Hi everyone. Oh, it's such a novelty to be in person. So we'll take you through the implementation of the mortals in London. So I won't go through the feeder route, again, just because Peter went through that with you a bit earlier. So we'll zoom straight into our current section under stress. So for London, this is New Cross. It was chosen as part of the A2 feeder route for its high place and movement function, which stood out to us as the area with the most competing demands. So it's the most challenging area to provide solutions for. It's a 1.6 kilometre stress section, and because of its length, we've split it into 3 sections, and within each of those 3 sections, there's really changing characteristics, even within the kind of 1.6 kilometres, so that's why we've split it into the 3. So really variable road widths in those 3 sections, dedicated bus lane variations, and modal facilities within each of those. So those pictures there just give you an idea of how that changes within those 3 sections. So we've characterised there the characteristics between those sections. So in general, there's severely low air quality, which is really concerning given its proximity to many local schools and residences. There's high bus flows along this route, so it's a strategic bus route to the wider southeast London, but there's major congestion and delays for buses on this route, which results in low bus speeds, and that's mainly as a result of the inconsistent provision of bus lanes, and also really high boarding figures there as well. There's high cycling flows, which again is concerning because there's no formal facilities for cycling along this entire section. We do see cyclists on the footway along here as well, which creates even bigger conflicts because of the high numbers of pedestrians as well. We've got high pedestrian density, so within, you'll see that red square, there are 2 stations, so New Cross Gate Station and New Cross Station, and the footway flows coming in and out of these stations are really high in the peak periods, and New Cross Gate Station in particular has the narrowest length of footway outside of that station, so causing real pinch points there. There's also high levels of illegal parking and loading, and also collision hotspots for vulnerable road users as well. So I'll take you through the stakeholder engagement pilot. So we did it a little bit differently to the other cities. So this was back in the summer of 2019. Rather than kind of spamming people's email inboxes, we decided to do a face-to-face approach with the tool. So popping along to schools and the businesses along the corridor, the stress section, targeting those and interest groups, community groups as well. Taking along the tool, the web-based tool on an iPad, introducing the project and the objectives, and then asking respondents to fill in the tool while we were with them. So that resulted in kind of meeting 40 stakeholders. We got not a huge amount of responses compared to the other cities, so engagement was fairly low. But just to give you an idea there in terms of the issues that people told us about, so that was mainly parking and loading, congestion, road safety and crossings. So again, consistent with the evidence that we've got and the data to support those issues as well. Some of the main outcomes we found from that engagement, so people don't generally distinguish between times of day, we found. So when asking, is this the problem in the morning, the evening, the weekend, generally people believe it happens all times of day, and that's just because it's a very subjective viewpoint to what time they're there and when the issue is occurring. So generally the response was this is happening all times of day, when kind of we know from the data that that's not necessarily true. Parking and loading, non-compliance issues came out a lot, and again, kind of road safety and crossing. So one of the big things that came out was people's concerns that guardrail had been removed from the footway, and that then they deemed to be unsafe because of children potentially walking out into the road, though we don't have many kind of stats on that happening, but it was a concern to people nonetheless. So that led us to create our objectives from the consultation that we did with people. The overarching outcomes aligned to the Mayor's transport strategy in London. And for people not familiar, that's a target of 80% sustainable mode share by 2041. And that's using the Healthy Streets indicators to encourage sustainable transport use. So as part of that, we developed 10 key objectives. So these incorporate the Healthy Streets approach and align with the Lewisham Transport Strategy, the New Cross Gate Area Framework, which are local plans in place around there as well. So using that design brief for the design priorities and road user requirements, this led us to 2 distinct thematic areas to design for, which was place priority and people move priority. So these are 2 areas to address each of the key priorities, but recognise that there's clear competing elements of the road space that require compromise to the detriment. Oh, I'm losing my breath. Thank you. I'll carry on for the meantime, thank you. So that requires compromise to the detriment of one or the other mode when prioritised. So it was deemed necessary to achieve the greatest benefits to allocate priority to each of these modes separately when developing the designs. So for the place priority, this refers to giving consideration to the stress section as a place, so that's considering its high priority function, and land uses of shops, cafes, restaurants, where people like to spend time and enjoy activities on the street itself. In terms of the design consideration, this not only refers to more space allocated for pedestrian activities on the footway, but also crossing facilities, so where pedestrian desire lines dictate, as opposed to where the least impact to traffic occurs, as is currently the kind of provision. So the people move priority aligns to the improved access to public transport, bus journey times, and reducing private car trip indicators of the key priorities identified in the design brief. Specifically on the corridor, buses act as the most efficient mode to transport significant numbers of people at all times of day, for which road space should then be prioritised to those buses. So just here to give you an indication, the A2 in New Cross, it includes a gyratory, and that currently operates as a one-way system. But as part of these designs, we proposed a 2-way access, bus access, through part of the gyratory, hence the depictions here in the designs that we've generated between one-way and 2 ways. So this just gives you an idea. So we're focused here on the public transport priority, so giving more priority and road space to buses. So an example, and I've just highlighted there in the top corner, where that location is. So this is outside New Cross Gate Station. So you'll see we've added bus lanes, continuous bus lanes where possible, extended bus stops and bus stop provision, but also giving consideration to pedestrian space outside of the station. So giving consideration to queuing for pedestrians who might be interchanging from the station as well. So this is at the other side of the corridor on the east. So this just shows, I skipped there a second. So again, similar consideration, so bus stop provision where, and bus lane provision where the road space allows. So just skipping ahead to the micro-simulation, the approach was taken to develop a highway model that existed already, that had been developed by TfL. And this includes bus services, cyclists, taxis, freight and passenger cars. The traffic signals coded in the model used an emulation of the Scoot system, which is used on street with the UTC Vision plugin. I'm not a modeller, so don't quiz me on anything technical. So the baseline modelling was not revalidated once the pedestrian elements were added. And also just a disclaimer here that design scenarios that we developed are not at a stage where TfL would ordinarily consider modelling, and therefore kind of the detailed designs would need to be remodelled after this in order to consider for delivery on street. And also strategic modelling would often be required for schemes such as these as well. So this just gives you an idea, a picture image of the gyratory that we were talking about there in the central section, and how the two-way designs then changed that alteration of the gyratory, which was really the biggest challenge in these designs and generating these designs. Following feedback on the designs from technical experts, the design options were sifted to those to take forward to modelling. It was decided the two-way operation of the gyratory within the stress section provided the best opportunity to achieve the design objectives and priorities. It was really challenging to develop the signal strategy to minimise bus delay and journey times, even though the new signals had been introduced to provide better pedestrian results. So now I'll just take you through some of the modelling results, so specifically narrowing in here on the pedestrian density results. So on the left there, this is the current, so the baseline is the current provision and outputs for pedestrian density and level of service. And then on the right-hand side there, you'll see the PT priority results for the PM peak. So the largest difference in density is on the northern pavement of the section on New Cross Road. So the high number of pedestrians waiting for a bus at that location leads to a very high density of pedestrians on the narrow pavement in that section. So in the new design, in the PM peak PT priority, as the bus stop's been consolidated, where the red circle highlights the pedestrian, in the pedestrian place scenario, this shows an improvement in that pedestrian density. So it's improved to level of service A there, or a lower density due to the wider pavements allocated, which is a kind of a good output of these designs. Onto the average speed results, so journey times. So this specifically looks at all of the design scenarios, but only in the PM peak. We do have kind of all the results for the different time periods as well, but for the purposes of not going into too much detail here, we'll just focus on the PM peak. So the average speeds in the model show that the general trend is that higher speeds are in the current scenario and the public transport priority scenario, with the exception of motorised vehicles in place priority. In contrast to the current scenario, public transport priority and the place priority have lower average speeds in all vehicle types in the second hour compared to the first hour. And we think this is due to the build-up of queues throughout the modelled time period. Buses, so having a look at buses here, so that's that last column, in the public transport priority scenario have a higher speed in the first hour, so we're really pleased to see that. However, we then see a lower speed in the second hour in comparison to the current scenario. So this shows that the overall lowering of speeds due to queues has an impact on the bus service. So queuing from general traffic has an impact on bus services, even though we've added in lots of bus speed provision and road reallocation to buses. So the conclusion here is something we see fairly often in this, is that allocating road space to priority modes alone doesn't always provide the sought after outcomes desired. So as road space priority also needs to be delivered alongside wider policy interventions that reduces the volume of traffic as well. So on to the appraisal results. Quite shocking here, you'll see, but I'll take you through and explain some of these. So each of the modelled options was inputted into the tool. However, just to say that the tool required extremely detailed information for the most part, which wasn't always available at the scale or the detailed level of the stress section for each of the design options. So the results of the appraisal methods kind of were treating with a bit of caution due to the limited data available to input into the tool, and also the subjectiveness of some of the indicators that they were assessed against. So if we focus on the political and technical assessment first, so that required the same inputs used for the option generation and road space design tools in terms of political priority considered for each road user and road use. So perhaps surprising to see there is that the existing road space layout and function, so that one-way function of gyratory, performed best against the performance indicators by a considerable margin as well in this appraisal against all of the design options generated. The reason for this is because the existing layout is the best for almost all movement indicators and for all modes. The other design options, particularly the place-based options, are best for place indicators, but there aren't so many of them with complete data from the VISM outputs. Hence, the aggregate results of the political and technical assessment assumes that because of the best quantity of data provided for the movement indicators, that the existing layout is best. Moving on to the multi-criteria analysis, again, we see that the tool suggests that the current layout is the best option to achieve our objectives and priorities. Again, this is due to the kind of insufficient data that we had to input for place-based performance indicators and the reduced reporting in comparison to movement performance indicators. We also did attempted to do the cost-benefit analysis, but given the insufficient knowledge of the implementation and maintenance costs of each of the design options modelled, again, at a very early stage that the designs were at, we weren't able to predict what those implementation costs might be or the maintenance cost. So we weren't able to come out with any results for the cost-benefit analysis. So essentially, again, it uses a lot of the movement indicators where a monetary value can be applied to the movement indicators. So again, the current layout is always going to be best there, but also there's a definitive lack of data on the monetary values of place indicators, which is a major limitation. So due to the limitations, as I've said for the other tools as well, in calculating implementation and maintenance costs for design options, it was just not possible to generate any costs or benefits, because there's always going to be costs for place-based indicators, but essentially no benefits because we don't have that information. So in terms of conclusions, just to reiterate, reallocating road space to prioritise certain modes doesn't always result in the anticipated benefits for that mode, as the VISM modelling results showed, and that's because the priorities need to be delivered in conjunction with wider policy interventions. And then there's also a definitive lack of data on the monetary values and benefits of place-based indicators, which is a major limitation with current appraisal methodologies. Just finally, to conclude on the tools, we weren't able to test the engagement tools as we would have liked to in terms of the blocks and acetates to generate the designs, so it's difficult to draw conclusions on the effectiveness of those. We found it, so because we generated the designs with technical professionals within TfL, we found that it was often overwhelming to present professionals with a blank piece of paper and say create a design, just because of the knowledge and the expertise in the room almost hinders the generation of kind of adding thoughts and designs onto paper that everyone could agree on. Again, thinking about the appraisal tool, so it requires very big assumptions to be made on very concept designs, so at the stage at which they are generated, which then potentially compromises the results in terms of taking those forward, and just the very detailed information that's required for a lot of those, again, the concept stage at which the designs are at. For VISM, it was really useful from a non-technical perspective to be able to evaluate and see on a page the impacts for both pedestrians and vehicles in one model. And it definitely aligned well with other initiatives that are being undertaken by TfL, particularly for modelling areas. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.